Hello.
Hey guys, welcome back to the show. This is Dr. Rob Kelly, the Addiction Doctor, along with Jennifer Lovely. We're on Recovery Channel podcast, and we're coming live to Facebook and YouTube right now. Going to be uploaded tonight over every podcast you can imagine. It's probably on there, so just search it or go to our Facebook page, which is on as well at the moment. It's the Recovery Channel podcast on Facebook. Jen, how you doing?
I'm doing good. It's been nice to spend this morning with you. And you know how much I love to spend time in diving deeper into our traumas. And the thing that I didn't understand when I first went into the rooms was that was the thing that was going to support me in codependency and how I was loving my children to death. And so I've read Dr. Jamie's book, and I'm so excited to hear from her face to face. So what about you?
Yeah, I think more and more these days, has gone for the last 27 years I've been in the industry. Let's stop looking at the alcohol and drugs as being the problem. Let's look at it as being the symptom. What is the problem? Well, the problem is I have a brain disease. My neural pathways are redirected, remapping from birth. How does that happen? Childhood trauma. That's how it happens. And people go, well, I've had no childhood trauma. Let me give you a definition with the addicted brain of childhood trauma. How many times have I told you you can't go to college like your brother? You're not clever enough. Get down off that chair, you stupid idiot. Childhood trauma. My brain would hold on to that, and just at the wrong time, it'll release it, and then I couldn't stop drinking. And it's all tied to central nervous system, the hypothalamus we talk about, the neural pathways. That's what we need to be looking at. That's like you said, Jen. You don't even have to be after alcoholic and addict. I think everybody needs to do this. I think everybody has trauma, because when I ask people, they go, "Oh yeah, well, never been in a plane crash, and my mom and dad are still alive."
Yeah,
and it's like that's trauma. That's a big trauma with a big T, but that's not all the trauma we're looking at. There's much more that you don't. And I love the way the big book says that. It says that you can't judge the trauma you're going through. It's not up to you to judge it. It's for other people to go, hey, that's huge, and let me explain why. I think the more we adapt that and the more we get into that, and I hate to call it new age treatment with a smile on my face, but you go to my outtake on this, Jen. You go to most treatment centers for 30, 60, 90, and most people drink on the way home because nothing's changed. So let's teach you some relapse prevention. And let's get up in the morning, brush our teeth at 7:06, because we're teaching you how to do things in life. And then you stick them back into that house that doesn't speak the language, and boom, back to square one.
Yeah.
Craziness, I tell you, craziness.
Let's bring our girl in.
Yeah, Dr. Jamie is coming on right after this, guys. Stick around. You're going to like this one, I'm telling you. Stick around, guys. Back just after this. Hey guys, welcome back. This is the Recovery Channel podcast. My name is Dr. Rob Kelly, the Addiction Doctor with Jennifer Lovely, and Dr. Jamie is on the show. Good afternoon or good morning. Where are you?
I'm right here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Welcome to the show.
Happy and delighted to be here.
You are such a humble woman in this recovery world. I have listened to so many of your podcasts. I've read your book. Couple things I'm curious about. Why did you go to Croatia?
Well, that's a great question. To be quite frank, at the time, it was a geographical cure, as we sometimes talk about in recovery circles. My family is from Croatia, and I had spent some time traveling and studying in the country, so it was a familiar place for me to run away to. But my life had reached such a place where I knew I had to do something, or I was not going to live. I was 21 when that happened, and I knew I probably wouldn't make it till Christmas, and this was Thanksgiving. And at the time, I had tried asking people close to me in my life for help, and I was either met with, you just have to go back to church because you've fallen away from God, or I remember one other parent had said, you're just too smart for all of this, find a way to figure it out. And so if there was help available in this country, I didn't know what it was really at that time. And I had whatever money I had saved up, and I packed a backpack and I went to Croatia and the Croatian part of Bosnia. And I had the sense if I could just hang out 8,000 miles away from all the people who are giving me grief, then I'll be okay. And as we know with geographical cures, if you take yourself with you, and if nothing changes, to quote the slogan. Yet I had the good fortune of having the two mentors placed in my path who would change my life. And one of them was my first sponsor, Janet Leff, who I write quite a bit about in my books. Her working, her paying it forward is why I'm here, why I'm alive, and why I'm working in this field.
So when you look back now on your life, what was the turning point? What was the moment when you thought, I think I need to change things now. I think I need help, and running away to a different country is not going to fix it?
Well, again, I thought running away would fix it at first, because I think the very first turning point moment I had was when I woke up that Thanksgiving weekend of 2000, and I was just in a state of suicidal use for several months at that point. I'd struggled with suicidal ideation since I was a small child, and having a lot of trauma-based mental health concerns. And there was just something about the way I was drinking. Some program people will call it the moment of clarity or the still small voice. Just something when I woke up that weekend said, if you don't change, you'll be dead in a few months. And I knew enough about myself at that point, even in my despair, to honor that. And I think that because when we talk about turning point moments, I didn't have just one. There were several. There were several in my early recovery, and I still have a major turning point every year as I continue to work on myself. And I believe the second turning point moment I had was after I was living in the Croatian part of Bosnia and Herzegovina for several months. I had stopped using drugs, but I continued to drink. I continued to court unhealthy relationships. And I had a moment where I had the occasion to use drugs again after not having used them for 8 months. And I couldn't understand why. Well, why was I was still drinking? And I had not made that connection yet, that for me, they're two heads of the same dragon, if you will. So that moment of clarity is when I knew I had to talk to somebody specifically about the drug use. I mean, I talked to a priest in confession, but I wasn't really getting any meaningful help. And then that's when I went to Janet, who became my sponsor and my mentor, because I had gone to a recovery meeting with her a month before as a translator. And something about that planted a seed in me. But even more important, just the way that Janet was as a person was the very essence of attraction rather than promotion. She never tried to force change on me. She never tried to beat recovery into my head. I just knew she was a good person I could go to. And on that day, it was in August of 2001, we just had what felt like a 3-hour long conversation. And I told her about some of my backstory and my history with chemicals. And at that point, she said to me, the good news is, Jamie, I believe you're alcoholic and an addict. And I said to her, how is that good news? And she said, it's good news because we know what to do about it. And then several months later, I had another turning point when she validated a meltdown that I was having at work as a trauma reaction. And, you know, Dr. Rob, similar to your introduction, I very much had that, well, I wasn't really traumatized. I didn't go to war. I didn't this, didn't that. And she said to me, well, would you consider that the war zone was your house?
Wow.
Would you consider that Skid Row was your bedroom and the desperation that you locked yourself into? So this fantastic woman not only validated my addiction, she also validated my trauma history. And that was really, I would say, the whole turning point summer that set my life on the course it is today.
Wow.
Beautiful.
It is. It's so beautiful. Part of the reasons I got into the room is because both of my children are recovering heroin addicts. And the way that his first rehabs was set up was I had to be in a room with my ex-husband for 4 hours, 2 nights a week. And it was so traumatizing for me. And I remember being in this rehab and he's having a reaction to me leaving him when I was 21 years old or 22 years old. And, 15 years has gone by and he's sobbing and they're like, what's going on? And he starts sharing his story. Well, all of my trauma is starting to come up and nobody is doing anything. Nobody's even saying anything. And I'm in a room full of about another 20 parents. Right. And so when you started talking about, I don't know if I read it in the book or I heard you on a podcast, but somebody just first being with you and acknowledging that it was there,
Yes.
period. And then challenging you when afterwards. Can you speak to that? Like,
Yes.
yeah.
Read the book well,
Yeah.
or have listened to other interviews well, because so much of what I teach now, which I learned from Janet that first day she heard my story and validated it, is the first step is acknowledging. And I know we say we have to acknowledge it to ourselves, but no, I think somebody has to acknowledge it in a witnessing presence. And the famous line, it's now famous because I shared it in so much of my work, but it was so vital to me. She said, Jamie, after everything you went through, and I'd only told her a small part during that first meeting, it's no wonder you became alcoholic. It's no wonder you became addicted. And then she took a nice breath and she said, so what are you going to do about it now? And I fear that in so much of traditional treatment or a lot of traditional approaches to 12-step programming, it's all about challenge, 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 tough love, don't let people sit in self-pity, et cetera, et cetera. But a person will shut down when you challenge them after first validating them, unless you first validate them. I truly believe that.
Yeah.
But on the other side of the coin, because I do a lot of work now in trauma circles, that sometimes there can be this over tendency to validate without then challenging. And it can become pity in that way. Like, you've been through so much because of your trauma. This is because of the trauma. This is because of the trauma. Yes. And so what's the solution now? And so I really believe the key here is validating people, hearing their story, letting them know, I hear this happen to you and this is part of your story. And literature shows that can be intervention in and of itself. Yet in so many treatment facilities, people can be met with this attitude of, you're not here to talk about your trauma. Or like in your case, Jennifer, here you were obviously traumatized and nobody was acknowledging it.
Right.
I love it. I went to a few people know this, but not everybody. During my time in Dallas, I was running a very stressful practice, and I had some sort of breakdown, and they didn't know what it was. I was in hospital, and the doctor come in, he's checking everything. And my wife called a psychiatrist that we know, and she came in and he said, Rob, you have PTSD and your trauma's caught up and you've had a breakdown. So they sent me to the Meadows over in Arizona. And I first got introduced to Peter Levine, who did a session on somatic experience, because the Meadows is all about trauma. And what I learned in that 45-minute presentation turned my head around. I came out, I'm now Meadows trained in somatic experience, because it was just some of the best things that I used. NLP, somatic experience, NLP, and brain spotting. I've just got accredited it. Is some of the most useful tools that I've ever come across. I mean, I truly believe, Dr. Jamie, that traditional treatment and traditional counseling, I think it might have been useful before the time of computers and laptops and everything else, because we're out there more.
Yes.
And we rely on oh, listen, I have 5,000 friends. No, Peter, you actually plugged into the wall. There is a difference, and I feel that trauma needs to be discussed in a deeper way. So someone comes to you, Dr. Jamie, and they go, hey, can you describe trauma to me? What's the answer?
Trauma is any unhealed human wound.
Boom!
I keep it nice and simple. So I was an English teacher before I was a therapist. That's what I did in Bosnia when I was working there. And so many clinical concepts we talk about: addiction, mindfulness, dissociation, trauma. I always go to, well, what do we know about the English word origin? Because that gives us so much of the answer. And the English word trauma comes from the Greek word meaning wound. And so for people who struggle with, well, have I really been traumatized? Have you been wounded? Yes, you may not have met criteria for diagnosable PTSD or a diagnosable dissociative disorder, but have you been wounded? And are there still some areas of unhealed wounding in your life? And if so, you've been impacted by trauma. And so for people who have a hard time wrapping their head around, have I been traumatized? Generally, they can accept that I've been wounded. And so much of what is still bothering me in life right now is because of those unhealed wounds. And I have a TEDx talk on this that you can look up. Just search my name on YouTube, or any of my resources sites will take you there. And I unpack this whole trauma as wound metaphor, because if you think about everything we know about physical wounds and how they heal, it gives us a lot of insight for working with emotional trauma, that wounds need to heal from the inside out. That yes, we often need to apply care from the outside in to stabilize the wound, which is a lot of what early treatment could be. But then, like you said in your intro, Dr. Rob, nothing's really changed inside out. And that has to happen. Wounds can leave scars. Sometimes scars hurt, sometimes they don't. And often it depends on where was the wound, how deep was it, did it infect, was proper treatment given at the time. Now, because of COVID, we all know what it means to be immunocompromised, right? And I think there are a lot of people who are the emotional version of that, what we might call those of us who are highly sensitive. And I know I was born a highly sensitive child. I still have memories of my family looking at me because I cried so easily. Like, what is this thing? And I've learned today not to take "you're so sensitive" as an insult, or not to take it as a character defect. Yet so much of what recovery has taught me how to do is work with emotion and work with my sensitivity so that I can protect myself, yet also be of service in the world.
Yeah, for sure. And I really would love to dive in. One of the things that I'm really good at is getting to the wound.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that I struggle with is not everybody wants to go to that wound. Yeah. And I personally am not a person that wants magic pixie dust on my head and then that would be okay. I want to dive in, splay it open, look at it, cry about it, feel it, put it back together and go, okay, I can now figure out what I've created from this. When people come to you, how do you support them in being able to even look at their wound?
It's a great question. And it's hard to answer in simple terms because folks come in different places. Mm-hmm. Yet I think if I had to summarize it in one approach, it's to work with whatever might be causing your feeling phobia. Because the reason a lot of folks have a hard time wanting to go there looking at their wounds, sometimes they think they can't handle it. They'll destroy themselves doing it, especially without drugs or alcohol. And I know it's a bit of a cheesy saying that you got to feel to heal, yet there's a lot of truth in it. And think about how many of us have been socialized, acculturated, taught, often because of trauma, to deny that we even have feelings. Or how many of us sometimes because of gender, like men don't cry, but even girls, especially in dysfunctional homes, can get it too. Like, yes, women are allowed to be emotional, but not too emotional, because then you're crazy. Then you can't rule the country, whatever it might be. So a lot of our messages around feelings are gendered. And a lot of it is the good old Claudia Black teaching, which has gotten absorbed into so much of recovery culture. Don't talk, don't trust, don't feel are the 3 unwritten rules of the alcoholic home or the dysfunctional home. And so many folks coming into trauma treatment, we describe what's possible and how we want to help you get in at that wound and feel it and get into the body. Yet so many people have blocks around that even being possible. And so I do think a first step is, how can I support you in what might be feelings phobia? Sometimes it's body sensation phobia, because we can be so cut off from our bodies because there's such intensity that we feel in our body as a result of unhealed trauma. And so I think those are the early steps that I would work on with just about anybody. And the nice thing is there's a variety of methods we have at our disposal to help people do that. Treatment, healing can never be one size fits all. I mean, we have a huge palette of things we know we can draw from that have been successful for a lot of folks. But I do believe that what early treatment can be is helping expose people to a lot of these different practices, and not just let's just sit around and talk. Because although that can be helpful for promoting human connection, often what happens is when we talk, all these feelings get churned up and then they're smacking us in our face, and we have no skills for actually kind of passing them through the body, feeling them through, getting our body back to an equilibrium. Dr. Rob, you mentioned somatic experiencing, and a lot of the skills that are taught in SE can be great for that. I'm also a yoga teacher and teach trauma-informed yoga curriculum and dance and expressive arts. And so much of it is to help people early on to learn to get into their body, to work with the stuff that gets churned up, to work with whatever skills are available to them, to practice self-compassion around feeling. And I think if we're speaking about the power of validation, a lot of where we have to start with folks is validating for them, listen, I get that it's hard to feel feelings. I'm asking you to do that, yet everything you've ever been taught is that it's not safe, it's not proper. And we don't give our kids skills. I mean, a lot of good parents do, but by and large, so many of us don't get the skills that we need to be able to manage feeling.
I don't think a lot of, like you said, a lot of us don't get it, because in my household, it was like everything that's said inside the house, it stays inside the house.
Yes.
And the other thing as well is we were born into poverty. So my mum would go out shopping somewhere and double glazing guy would come and she'd give an address from around the corner at the posh estate, not our estate. So she would say to us, if somebody calls and asked about the windows, tell them this address. Don't tell them our address. So we learn at an early age to lie, of course, and then to cover up. And then it's like with the wounds, it's like they've already, or I'd put this Band-Aid around that nobody could get into. And I'm still working on it, Dr. Jamie. I'm still today, when I wrote the book, it was very, very healing for me. But even today, I was walking through with the dogs before and something happened and another memory came up that I'm not even aware of. It's like the subconscious brain is still leaking stuff out that's been well forgotten that still I'm working on today. Because I don't know about you, but when you get to be doctor status and you're doing work in the recovery, and it's groundbreaking stuff we do and helping people, and nobody looks at us and goes, "Hey, are you okay? How are you doing today?" And I see a therapist. I still see a therapist, and I think it's healthy to see a therapist. I don't see what I'm supposed to see.
I could not agree with you more. I have been in therapy pretty constantly since recovery. I mean, I've had periods where I've not been, and then it's clear to me when something can happen in life that I need to get back in. I think everybody who works with the public and works with human misery should at least have their own therapist or some other outlet where they can regularly be working on themselves. And I know my yoga practice helps me with that. I still have an amazing recovery story. And I'm fortunate to have a lot of friends who are therapists themselves, especially who know that I'm a public figure, and they are willing to check in with me just as Jamie the person, which I really very much need. And something that's stood with me in early recovery, I mean, I've been clean and sober now 18 and a half years. I'm so grateful for it. Yet I've also been married and divorced twice in recovery.
Yeah.
The relational element. And one of my very good friends who's no longer with us used to say, I think our relationship parts of our life can be some of the last ones to heal because they were some of the first ones to get hurt.
Yeah.
That part of our life. And so I've made a lot of strides in that area, that it is something that I still am healing from and addressing today.
Oh yeah. I mean, to be loved, to be deeply loved and seen is my biggest work. Is my biggest work. I can be seen by other people, but to really be seen by somebody that loves my heart is still hard. I'm still working, swimming in that ocean. Can we talk a little bit about sponsors?
Yes.
So sponsors are there to support you through the steps and do the work. And yet my experience with sponsors is it hasn't always been helpful.
Right.
Because they have their stuff. And sometimes that can be re-traumatizing. Can we talk a little bit about how can we support people to sponsor people in a healthy way?
Oh, how much time do we have?
I know.
One of the reasons I wrote Trauma in the 12 Steps, the first edition in 2012, and especially this edition, is I wrote it for sponsors too. Because even though it has a lot of clinical language in it that speaks to clinicians, I believe every sponsor needs to be more trauma informed, because a point that a lot of folks don't realize is being trauma informed is for everybody. For anybody who makes contact with the public. Your dentist, your receptionist at the dentist office can be trauma-informed people. Coaches can be trauma-informed. Teachers can be trauma-informed. It basically means you know what trauma is, you acknowledge its impact on the human brain, and you make a plan to at least do no further harm. But hopefully to also offer some supportive processes like the whole validate and then challenge instead of coming and challenging. So a little backstory for people who aren't totally aware that the sponsor relationship is non-professional. It's definitely meant to be non-professional. For people outside of 12-step world, I often describe it as it's mentorship. It's somebody who can work you through the steps. And some people have more micromanagerial views on sponsorship than others. And I've just had the good fortune to work with three pretty amazing sponsors in my time in recovery, and my current sponsor is the absolute best. And it's been hard because I look at just a lot of bad sponsorship that happens. And so much of what makes it bad or negative, I think at the absolute worst is when you see sponsors trying to act as professionals, saying things like, you don't need to take those medications, or, you don't need counseling. You just not drink and go to meetings. And then you have sponsors, I mentioned the word micromanage, who totally believe that they have to micromanage the person's life. I've never believed that. Something or I should say, even early on when I saw that happen in certain program rooms, it just felt too much like home to me. And that I didn't like that at all. And Jennifer, you bring up an excellent point that so many sponsors, so many meetings, and I would even add to that, so many treatment centers are run by people who haven't worked on their own stuff. And
Right.
part of the wound metaphor is that if you don't heal your own wounds, you are going to bleed over everybody else. And I see that happen in the sponsorship relationships so often. But on the other side of that coin, I've seen some sponsors. I try to be the kind of sponsor who I know I needed to have, because even though I'm a professional and do all this stuff, I still sponsor several women because it just helps me in a totally different way than being a clinician does. So, I mean, with a lot of my clients, I sometimes guide them towards other sponsors or make a recommendation that they look for another one if it feels like the one that they're with is just too controlling, because that concerns me. Because I think fundamentally, the job of a sponsor is to share experience, strength, and hope. The job of a sponsor to do that and to help a person work the steps. And if they're taking that role into any other place, I think is where you can get some of the damage.
I ask all my sponsees and people in AA, interview them. Interview your sponsor. Yes. Don't just take the first guy that comes along, because here's what I found, Dr. Jamie, in the years I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous is I've traveled around the world, been in many meetings, spoke at many meetings. I would estimate, and this is my opinion, guys, that 80-85% of any room of Alcoholics Anonymous, there's 80-85% of people that are not alcoholics. And what them alcoholics do is they don't read the information that they're given, i.e. the big book. They have no other training. They think it's a power stretch or some sort of power hunt. Call me every day, wear blue socks on Sunday, and the men's process they get them doing is like, it's just, my first sponsor told me to go to my best friend 20 years later and told him I slept with his wife. Well, of course, we started a fight. They got divorced, and the poor child had no father because the father committed suicide because he couldn't take it all. That was my sponsor telling me that. So I think more sponsors need to take responsibility. Stop giving medical advice out. You don't know what you're talking about. Stop acting, like you said, acting like a clinician. You are not. You don't have the training. Share your experience at home from a book you've read, but interview them, guys. I mean, I know, and years don't make a difference to me, sponsors, by the way, if you're listening. Well, I've got 50 years sobriety. That doesn't make any difference to me. What have you done for the alcoholic or addict today? Because my sponsor of 20-something years, on the fourth or fifth time we sat down and talked, took me back to his house, gave me coffee with sleeping tablets in, and I woke up next to him naked in the bed with him. So I don't believe in years. I believe in look at someone's eyes, look at the passion they have for this thing, and talk about AA and talk about the book. Don't give any advice about anything else. And that's just where I am.
And I do thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's a powerful attestation to what can go wrong, for sure. And I think I've just been very blessed to have had, as I said, three pretty amazing sponsors. And my current sponsor, I found really through that directive we're often given, find somebody who has what you want. And I know when I was early on, I didn't really know what I wanted. So that would have been hard to make the call based on that. But as a woman with double-digit sobriety, when I found my current sponsor, so I am a bisexual woman, and I'm sponsored by a 78-year-old gay man. He is the most amazing human being I've ever met. And something I loved about him, not only was it good, practical recovery, And in talking with him, I remember I had the interview. I agree with that. I met with him. We kind of talked for those several hours. And not only did he have good recovery, but I looked back and he and his husband have been together and out for something like 55 years in Ohio. And his husband is also in recovery. And I said to myself after getting to know the two of them, I want what they have, specifically what Daryl, my sponsor, has. And that is this comfort in himself to be able to be out regardless of what people in our very conservative state said for that long. So I know that guidance has really worked for me in later recovery in finding a sponsor, because I think when you have some time in recovery, you do start to see what works and what doesn't work, what you want and what you don't want. And I believe some of my best teachers have actually been the bad examples. So when I see examples of sponsorship that's like, no, that doesn't feel good to me, I know I want something that's quite different than that. So I love what we're talking about here, the idea of interviewing potential sponsors. I also encourage, when I send people to 12-step meetings, please don't judge the whole process by one meeting, because not all meetings are created equally. Some are terrible and I would never send people to. Others are amazing. And even one of the exercises I have in the back of Trauma and the 12 Steps is to keep a log of the meetings you go to. I did that very early when I moved back to the US and started trying out meetings. And I just wrote down notes about this meeting, this night, this is what I liked about it. If I felt totally unsafe at a meeting, I would indicate that as well. And you'll get a sense of where you will find the best fit for you at whatever. And it could change at different points in your recovery, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I love that. It's funny because when I live in a rural area on an island, and I ran up here because I was running away from my children's heroin addiction. And people would ask me, like, are you here to heal or are you here to hide? And there was a little bit of both. But I could never find a meeting that was as good as the ones that I had in Orange County, California. COVID has been a great thing because now we can do them online, and now you can create that. Well, I guess what I really want to talk to you about is when we find a meeting, how we get attached to that meeting, and that is the only thing that will fill us up, and we become we're not open to anything else, as has been my experience, and that this is the end all be all. Are there other resources that you have that could really support people in finding multiple ways of healing and supporting?
Yes. If I can go here, some of the best recovery I have found, especially in recent years, have been people who are clearly in recovery yet are not 12-step affiliated. Some of the shout outs I can give is the She Recovers movement. I adore them and their work. And yeah, a lot of 12 steppers within that, but they offer She Recovers dance and trauma informed yoga and places that are still recovery safe spaces. And if you follow me on Facebook, you can, my Facebook business page is Mindful Ohio and the Institute for Creative Mindfulness. And we also have a group, Trauma and the 12 Steps networking group, that people can ask to join. I do a Monday night yoga women meeting with one of my sponsees. And then we also have a Thursday night sitting meditation that my sponsor and I lead together. So I think some of it is to seek out supportive practices with spaces that feel safe enough. And I think so much of this is the rigidity that gets beat into people's heads that like you're cheating on AA or cheating on steps somehow. And that's just not cool, because there's so many great recovery or healthy centered spaces that you can try out. And I think a good sponsor, going back to sponsorship, can help guide a person in that process. And speaking a little bit to my experience with that, because I never got so attached to a meeting. But my middle sponsor in my journey, I had her for 11 years. And as I said, she was wonderful. And to be honest, though, she was probably not the best fit for me in the last several years that she sponsored me. And I knew I needed someone else because of the direction I was moving into and kind of where she was at in contrast. But I was so afraid to dump her or fire her or dismiss her. It's like, well, is that saying that I want an easier, softer way? Am I, as I already mentioned, cheating on her? It's like, no, you will have to change. And it's okay. But I had to look at that with my own therapist as how much of that was old religious programming, because so much of my trauma was spiritual, religious in nature, that I had to work through. So that's just my general take on it.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
I know you've got a hard stop at the top of the hour, and so have I. So it's 5 till now. We didn't put any commercials in just to get as much of you as we could today.
Oh, wonderful.
My apologies for what happened before. I have no idea. We didn't get the email to you before. Maybe we'll get you on again, because there's a bunch of things we still need to talk about and ask you.
Anytime.
And you're so full of information, and you're such amazing with what you do, and the education and the passion, and all the stuff, and the kind of people I like to speak to. So if it's okay with you, I know you're busy, Dr. Jamie, but I'm going to get my girl to reach out to you again, and then we can do another hour, full hour, when nobody's got anything on. And
let's do it. Let's plan it in the new year, because I really adore when people ask such meaningful questions.
Yeah. Well, me and Jen like to pride ourselves on asking the questions that nobody else asks, because you get on the podcast and they go, it's like, what people say to me and Jen, can you send me the questions? There isn't any questions. The information. If you're intelligent, if you're passionate, we'll go on for 5 days. But if you're not, we'll bump you after 20 minutes. I
like being spontaneous.
Yeah. It's the best way, because then you know that people are being truthful, because it's very hard when you're on live anyway to think of a live real quickly. Well, listen, Dr. Jamie, thank you so much for being on here. We'll definitely speak again. But for now, I just want to say thank you so much. You are awesome.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And I also want to say that I remember people saying, like, I would see on Facebook, I'm a yoga teacher as well, and I teach a yoga 12-step, but people would say, oh, I need to do yoga informed training. And then I would say to them, do your own trauma. Work on your own trauma, right? And so being that is the case, what do you want to leave people with? And what do you want them to know until we see you again, Jamie, Dr. Jamie?
Let me see what's here in the moment.
Yeah.
I think what's coming up for me right now, because I just took a nice deep breath into your question, and so much of this is what being a yoga teacher has taught me, and that's informed my recovery, is that holding your breath does not make it easier.
Yes.
So keep breathing, whether you're breathing through doing step work, whether you're breathing through doing physical yoga, trauma work, that we can have this tendency when we've been traumatized to hold our breath, because our shoulders are always going up by our ears. We're on alert, we're unaware, and that impacts our breath. And part of this mentality to push through, we hold our breath when we do that. And yes, life is hard, and you may have to be tough through certain situations, yet holding your breath never makes it easier.
Awesome.
Yeah. Whatever you're doing, keep breathing through it.
Guys, I don't want to leave.
I know.
This has been freaking awesome. Absolutely. It's absolutely awesome. But I do have something, and you do as well, Dr. Jamie. And I know Jennifer's got something at the top of the hour. So, hey, guys, listen, we'll be back on again with Dr. Jamie in the new year. Stick around. I'll give you plenty of time. Maybe we'll stick it out for an hour and 30 minutes. Needs to be talked about. This is great information. You're not going to hear anyone else, guys. But for now, guys, we're all going to say bye-bye until next time. And thank you so much for being you.
Cheers. Bye. See you again. Bye.